All right. Hello. Welcome back to another Classic Comics Trek Talk, where I take a look at one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series, both the series itself and behind the scenes of the making of the episode. If you would, please do like this stream while you're here and do sub to the channel also if you haven't already. Okay, so we got a few people here in the chat. Hello, Lord Thoths. Thank you for stopping by, sir. Jay Rocker as well. Thank you for stopping by also. And Adega Outlaw, of course. Again, as always, glad to see you here, sir. Okay. Um, and as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages for the behind the scenes information. So, also, um, let me see. Okay, well, I'll wait for that at the end. But okay, so the episode we're taking a look at today, of course, is a classic, Space Seed, a fan favorite to be sure. This is episode 23 in production order. This episode was well, the original story was by a guy named Kerry Wilbur. The teleplay by Gene Kuhn and Kerry Wilbur, although Roddenberry, it seems, did some uncredited work on this, or at least he thought he did. And it's directed by Mark Daniels, who's already done several Star Trek episodes by this point. So this is from the NBC press release issued on January 26th, 1967. Ricardo Montalban guest stars as the survivor of a tyrannical super race in Space Seed, a drama in which Captain Kirk and his crew are unwitting accomplices to an attempt to seize world power on the NBC television network's color cast of Star Trek. Found aboard an ancient and floundering cargo vessel with his body in a state of suspended animation, Khan is allowed to convalesce on the USS Enterprise. Suspicious of Khan's true identity, Kirk and Spock soon determine their patient is one of a group of scientifically bred super beings bent on world domination and put him under guard. With the aid of a sympathetic crew member named Marla, who has fallen in love with him, Khan escapes and wrests command of the Enterprise and threatens the entire ship's complement with execution. Space Seed is a study of human ambition and loyalty. It also explores power as an aphrodisiac. This is a smartly written script and overall a well made and effective episode. The positive and negative dynamic between Ricardo Montalban and William Shatner was still electric a decade and a half later when their characters again clashed, this time on the big screen in Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan. Despite its attributes, Space Seed does break with the pattern of very nearly all other Star Trek episodes. It projects a bleak future for mankind, in the 1990s at least, one filled with war and despair, a future well within the lifetimes of many who were watching when Space Seed first aired in February of 1967. This time, our time has proven the terrible events predicted in this episode for the late 20th century wrong, or at least their timing was off. Two minor blemishes. The awkward fight scene in engineering is reminiscent of the one in Court Martial, also staged by Mark Daniels. And these chauvinistic attitudes of Khan, combined with the passiveness of Lieutenant MacGyver's, are either believed or dismissed depending on the tastes and beliefs of individual audience members. Okay. So I'm guessing this one's pretty familiar to most people, but we will go ahead and take a look at this episode anyway. I don't know why the font is wrong on that. I don't know. That seems to happen sometimes when I put the PowerPoint in here, the font, the Star Trek font goes away. I don't know why that happens sometimes, but then it doesn't other times. All right, so the Enterprise detects a signal and discovers a derelict ship floating in space. This type of ship was last launched in the 1990s. They detect faint life signs on board, but the ship doesn't respond to hailing signals. Spock says the ship is named Botany Bay, but no such ship is listed in the historic registries. Spock notes that records from that time are fragmentary, as the 1990s were when the last World War, the eugenics wars, took place, when a group of scientists created a race of genetic supermen that tried to conquer the world and were responsible for the deaths of millions. This is, of course, different from the franchise wars that were won by Taco Bell, of course. Kirk orders the tractor beam to capture the ship and leads a boarding party that includes Lieutenant MacGyvers, a historian. Now, they beam aboard and they find around 70 humans in some form of cryosleep. Scotty brings the main power back online, and the sleeper unit for this guy starts to awaken him. He's taken to sick bay while Kirk asks Scotty to check the ship's records for any information on the purpose of their voyage, but Scotty can't find any. Spock and Kirk discuss the ship and whether or not it poses a threat. And I really love this. There's a couple of scenes between Kirk and Spock in this episode that I really like, just because of the interactions between Spock and Kirk. And this is one of them. Okay, now in sick bay, Bones tells Kirk that the man they brought over has superior physical capabilities, and Kirk notes that creating superior humans was what the eugenics wars was all about. Then Kirk gives Lieutenant MacGyvers a bit of a dressing down, criticizing her for her behavior on the Botany Bay. MacGyvers admits that she finds the stranger from the past fascinating, but insists that as a historian, her interest is entirely professional. The stranger awakens and gets the drop on McCoy, holding a scalpel to his throat. Then he demands to see the captain. After meeting with Kirk, he demands that Kirk awaken his companions on the Botany Bay, but Kirk says that they will be awakened at a later time. Kirk asks his name, and he says that his name is Khan. Kirk asks the date that they left Earth, and Khan at that point says that he grows fatigued. Kirk wants to continue, but Bones says that later might be a better time. Kirk then asks for something to read while he rests, and Kirk tells him how to access the ship's computer library, including the ship's technical information. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe don't make technical details of your starship available to a guy you barely know, whose motives you don't really know anything about. Earlier Kirk was speculating that because the ship was called Botany Bay, this might be a group of escaped criminals. And then just a couple of scenes later, it's like, yeah, sure, here you can see our computer system and all our files on our ship. Sure, go right ahead. James Caserta says, yeah, just like the girl fell for Apollo. Yeah. Um, okay, so on the bridge, Kirk and Spock discuss the eugenics wars when a group of genetic supermen seize power in over 40 nations. Kirk says that they weren't really supermen, but they were arrogant and aggressive, and Spock notes that superior ability breeds superior ambition. They agree that Khan seems likely to be a product of genetic engineering, and Spock notes that around 90 or so of these genetic supermen were never accounted for. In sickbay, MacGyvers is thirsty. I mean, she's curious about Khan and his mission. Khan chides her for wearing her hair up. It's not attractive, and tells her to change it. He then adjusts her hair, sort of. I mean, he doesn't really change anything. Let's see. And MacGyvers arranges for a formal dinner in Khan's honor. Khan visits her in her quarters beforehand and notes her many portraits of great heroes and conquerors of the past, including a portrait of him. The thirst is strong in this one. At the dinner, Kirk again inquires about Khan's ship and its mission and why there's no historical record of it. Khan says that there was little reason to stay on Earth. Spock notes that there was a war to end tyranny, but Khan disputes this, saying it was a time of great optimism and aspirations. He then tells Kirk that he's a great tactician, letting his first officer probe for weakness while he observes. Kirk says that Khan fled Earth at a time when it needed good leaders and asks if Khan fled because he was afraid. And Khan insists that we offered the world order. Realizing that he's slipped up, Khan says, I grow fatigued again, and excuses himself. Later, MacGyver visits him at his quarters and admits that she knows who he is. He tries to make a move and she resists, and then tells her he plans to seize control of the ship and asks her to assist him. She resists, and then he goes pretty much full pimp mode and says, you're going to help me right now. And she reluctantly agrees to assist. Meanwhile, Kirk and his officers. All right, hold on. Let me bring the next one up here. There we go. Meanwhile, Kirk and his officers have identified Khan as Khan Noonien Singh, who ruled over much of Asia and Middle East from 1992 to 1996. Kirk, Bones, and Scotty discuss the merits of Khan's rule, noting that he committed no massacres and didn't attack anyone until he was attacked first. Spock expresses bewilderment at the romanticism of a ruthless dictator, but Kirk assures them that they can admire Khan, but also be opposed to him. And Spock notes that this is all highly illogical. Kirk has Khan placed under guard. Yeah, finally. I mean, how many episodes would have been a lot shorter if they just put even minimal security on this stranger they've got on their ship? But at least they put a guard on him. And James Caserta says, tour de force. Yeah, great performances, particularly by Ricardo Montalban, and just a really good classic episode all around. Okay, so Kirk visits Khan and talks with him and again asks the purpose of their space mission. Khan says that it was a chance to start over on a new world. He then notes that Kirk is inferior to him and talks a bit about how little humans have changed over the centuries and finishes by saying, yes, we will do very well here. Kirk then leaves, and yeah, I don't know, maybe two guards instead of just one. The guy's like several times stronger than a normal person. Demonstrating that, he forces the door open and then like knocks the one guard out with one blow. Okay, in the transporter room, MacGyver's pulls a phaser on Mr. Kyle, the transporter chief, and then Khan knocks him out and beams over to the Botany Bay, where he frees the other supermen from their cryosleep. On the bridge, Kirk learns that Khan has escaped and orders a general alert, but then discovers that the turbo lifts don't work, and Khan has taken control of the ship from engineering. He tells Kirk that he's shut off light support to the bridge, but says that he's willing to negotiate. Kirk orders Spock to flood engineering with gas to knock everyone out, but Spock says they're locked out of the computer. He notes that Khan was quite thorough in his study of their computer records, just to rub the salt in the wound. Eventually, everyone on the ship passes out from lack of air. Later, Khan gives the bridge officers a chance to join him, saying he needs their help to operate the ship. Scotty demands to know where Kirk is, and Khan has Uhura slowly show them an image of Kirk, trapped inside a decompression chamber as the air is slowly drained out. He offers to spare Kirk if they will join him and that they will each get the same treatment if they don't. But the crew refuses. MacGyver's asks to leave and Khan agrees. Then the video feed to the decon chamber is lost. But Khan says it doesn't really matter as Kirk is already dead. He then orders Spock to be placed in the decompression chamber next. Meanwhile, MacGyver's knocks out the guard with a hypo spray and frees Kirk. Oh, hello, Snortopoopus. Q Burr. Hello, sir. Thanks for stopping by. And I got to say, the last part, of this episode really calls into question the whole superior intellect thing of these genetic supermen because they kind of do the same kind of dumb things that, pretty much every villain in a TV show does. MacGyver's abruptly asks to leave. And Khan says, sure, you can leave. Then a few minutes later, the video feed's lost, and no one puts two and two together that she might be responsible. And then when she goes to the decon chamber, she tells, the guard there, who supposedly is genetically enhanced too, that, Khan says to keep a close eye on him. And he's like, okay. And then just stares in the window while she zaps him with a hypo. And then also, so she frees Kirk, right? And then Spock shows up with the other guard, and the other guard just is completely oblivious to the first guard that's lying unconscious on the floor for, plot convenience. But then they overpower him. Spock pinches him, knocks him out. And that's kind of setting aside the whole thing that you would think these genetic supermen, like the hypo, like a sedative wouldn't work as well on them. But, whatever. So then Spock lays out the situation, how Khan's men have control of the ship, and they decide to flood the decks with anesthetic gas. Khan manages to escape. Kirk finds Scotty, who is trying to follow Khan, and he says that Khan went to engineering. Give me a moment here, just a moment. Sorry, needed a drink of water. So Kirk then goes to engineering to get Khan. Now Khan in engineering hears that Kirk is on the way, so he ambushes Kirk. Easily disarms him, crushes his phaser. He then tells Kirk that he has set the Enterprise's engines on overload. And it's not clear if he means like the impulse engines or the warp engines. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. So then we have a classic brawl between Khan and Kirk. Kirk gets in, or rather his stunt double gets in. We get in some of the classic Kirk moves, the flying drop kick, the head scissors, no judo chop, no double blow to the sides of the head, that sort of thing. But then he manages to pull one of these things, whatever they are. It's never explained what they are, but he pulls one of these out and manages to beat Khan unconscious with it. And then he is able to shut off the overload and save the ship. After this, Kirk holds a hearing. And of course, Khan has some serious charges leveled against him. But Kirk, in one of his more interesting decisions over the course of the series, decides that instead of sending you to prison, he asks Mr. Spock, aren't we nearing the Ceti Alpha system, Mr. Spock? And Spock notes that they are, and that the fifth planet of that system can support life, although it is quite primal. Kirk then says that the criminals who went to Botany Bay were able to tame a continent and challenges Khan to tame a planet, and Khan accepts going to this planet instead of going to prison. And then, of course, he makes the same challenge to MacGyver's. And of course, it's either that or a court martial. So she agrees to go with Khan and his people. And of course, we get the classic line where Khan asks, "Have you ever read Milton, Captain?" Afterwards, Scotty asks, "It's a shame for a good Scotsman to admit it, but I'm not up on Milton." And Kirk says, "It's the line in Paradise Lost when Lucifer was cast down into the pit. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven." And I'm sure this won't have any repercussions down the road either. So, directed by Mark Daniels, as I said, teleplay Gene Coon, Carrie Wilbur. Guest starring Ricardo Montalban, Madeline Rue as Marla, etc. And of course, this is an A plus. How could it not be? So let's go ahead and talk about the behind the scenes making of this episode. Okay, so Carrie Wilbur was 50 when he did his share of the writing on Space Seed. His screen credits went back to 1948 for shows such as Studio One, with stops in between it on episodes of Captain Video and Robin Hood. He even wrote an episode for Jeffrey Hunter's series Temple Houston, one of his two contributions to the show that was badly panned by Variety. Roddenberry probably hadn't read the reviews, though, and probably wouldn't have cared, as every TV writer gets a bad review in the trades now and then, Roddenberry included. What matters was that Roddenberry knew Wilbur and liked him. The two had worked together briefly on a 1950s show called Harbor Master, which I never heard of, where Wilbur served as story editor. During the same period Wilbur wrote for Star Trek, he sold scripts to Irwin Allen for The Time Tunnel and Lost in Space. To Wilbur, science fiction shows were fairly interchangeable. Quote, "Hell, the plot for Space Seed came from an old Captain Video episode I did," he admitted. "We did some very far out things on that show, including the popular idea of people being transported in space while in suspended animation." Unquote. Elements of the plot for Space Seed can be found in the first few episodes of Lost in Space, where Wilbur was working 1 year earlier. The Robinson family is frozen, their breathing and heart rates slowed, thereby reducing aging while their ship travels to Alpha Centauri. Wilbur's Star Trek story also involves space travelers put into suspended animation. Something goes wrong with the ship, and it too is lost in space, only to be found by the Enterprise 2 centuries later. Uh, The new element, of course, is that these space travelers are criminals, discarded much the same way misfits from England back in the 1700s and early 1700s were exiled to Australia. The ship is even named after the landing place of the first convicts to set shore in Australia, Botany Bay. However, contrary to popular belief and the rewriting of history in this episode, there never was a penal colony at Botany Bay. After landing there, the British soldiers in charge of the convicts discovered the area to be unsuitable for colonization and then made their way to Port Jackson, which then became the first permanent European settlement in Australia. Now, for this story, Wilbur chose the name Harold Erickson for the leader of the convicts, describing him as a, quote, Nordic Superman. Communications officer Marla McGivers falls for Erickson and helps him revive the rest of the convicts of the damaged sleeper ship so they can commandeer the Enterprise. Now, Stan Robertson at ABC liked the story outline for Space Seed, and he was now acknowledging Gene Coon, writing to the new producer directly rather than to Roddenberry. Robertson wrote, the author of this storyline, Carrie Wilbur, seems to have, at least in the initial presentation, come up with a most exciting Star Trek episode. There is an exciting blend of past Earth history, the similarity of the plot with the colonization of Australia, plus a current problem of our contemporary society, overpopulation, and a believable and interesting, if not novel, science fiction gimmick. The revitalization of people 700 years after their normal span of life. Robertson did not complain that Space Seed was in a sense a bottle show, since at this stage, to the horror of Robert Justman, much of the action in the episode takes place on the sleeper ship and even out in the vacuum of space. Um, and when Robert Justman saw the original or the initial screenplay or story, he was worried about how much this was going to cost, and he wasn't alone in disliking the teleplay. A staff memo, which did not identify who the sender was, uh, it turned out it was Stephen Karabatsos, uh, gave notes in an unofficial capacity and was highly negative. Among them, these remarks. The story starts much too slowly and plods in other spots. All our regular characters are out of character, especially Kirk and Spock. Kirk has no command presence and no strength. He stands around a lot. In fact, almost all our people stand around a lot. Marla's attitudes and the love story with Erickson are unbelievable, and the payoff is too melodramatic, not Star Trek. So it sounds like it's one of those episodes where the writer really makes it mainly about the guest star and not about the main characters. And Jay Rocker agrees. Yeah, an A plus. Martin Birchall, hello, sir. Thank you for stopping by. Do you have any plans to interview the film director William Shatner on the making of Star Trek movies and T.J. Hooker, which William Shatner started in and being the oldest man in space? You mean, do I have any plans to interview Shatner? No. I mean, he wouldn't. If I asked him for an interview, he wouldn't respond to me. I'm nobody. It would be interesting maybe to when I do the movies. I mean, assuming I get to around to covering the movies on Trek Talk, that maybe do some behind the scenes stuff on that and talk about the making of Star Trek Five and everything that went wrong with that. Talk about a troubled production. But I mean, as far as interviewing William Shatner, no, I wouldn't even bother trying because he wouldn't agree to be interviewed by me. It would be I'm beneath his notice. Um, okay, and also Gene L. Kuhn also wrote, "We have quite a bit of work to do on this script. Part of it is because of the unfamiliarity with what is possible or probable in standard operating procedure on our ship. And part of it is due to just flat missing the mark here and there. The character of Erickson just does not come off as the heroic, conquering hero I think we need. In some aspects, it comes off as almost a small time thug, a punk who would have no chance of taking over the Enterprise and couldn't even conceive of a grand decision, which is, I believe, hacking out a place for himself in this world of the future. The second major flaw we have going for us is in the character of and actions of Marla MacGyver's. As it is, she takes a look at the unconscious Erickson and decides she loves him. It is imperative that we establish first that she too is a person out of her time. She yearns for the ancient, for the heroic, the grand, the days when men were men and all that. And she has not known love in this modern age. She has never found a man of the stature she requires. The great conquistador, the hero, the flamboyant, world shaking giant of a man a la Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand, the popular writer of the 1950s, wrote many stories about women falling for domineering men, and one such man in one of Rand's early novels, The Little Street, which was a character named Denny Renahan, whom the author described as, quote, a man with no regard whatever for all that society holds sacred, and with a consciousness all his own, a man who stands alone in action and in soul. Now, part of the problem regarding Marla MacGyver's was that Wilbur made her Uhura's alternate as the ship's communications officer. Kuhn would later change that and have her be the ship's historian, a crew member in love with the past and its men, and whose input is so rarely needed that Kirk can't even get her name right. Kuhn's letter listed all the problems he and his staff had come up with. Wilbur accepted the feedback and harsh criticism well, and in early December turned in his second draft. The improvements were few and far between. Gene Roddenberry had much to say to Gene Kuhn over Wilbur's rewrite. In a lengthy memo, Roddenberry called it a deceptive script. Quote, at first reading, it seems clean, straight lined, and orderly progression of ideas and emotions, but actually its entire underpinnings is weak. Fixable, however, if we take a long, hard look at the shaky logic supporting the whole story, replace it with believable ideas. At the center of the shaky logic was the very seed of Wilbur's story that Earth's misfits would be frozen and shot into space, beginning with a reference to the sleeper ship named Botany Bay, Roddenberry wrote. This concept, sounding romantic, may have gotten us into trouble. For example, it is hard to believe that the world of the 90s sending men off to a penal colony in the stars. Romantic, but impractical. No advanced world of the 90s would do this. No barbaric or Dark Ages world of the 1990s would spend the hundreds of millions needed to do it, when a simpler expedient for a barbaric world would be simply to put the men to death. So the entire concept is rather shaky to start with. Let's see. Okay, and here we go. And then there was what Wilbur described as the dark ages of the 1990s. Regarding this, Roddenberry wrote, there may be a possible key to making the story believable. Let's say the Earth during the 90s was catapulted into a kind of dark ages. Let's further say that in this period, instead of being involved with criminals and criminal deportees, there was a period where the criminals were being glorified. It's not that impossible. Criminality, from some points of view, was glorified in the age of chivalry. So, following that line of logic, let's just say a society of super criminals, highly intelligent, intellectually and physically daring, believing in the purity of violence in war and conquest, took advantage of atomic war and catastrophe and rose to control the earth. This could, in fact, be Erickson and his men. Think of it in terms of Hitler and his cohorts back in the day. From their point of view, in the days of 1945. Had space travel been practical at that time, might Hitler and his crew have not decided to flee the world rather than ending their lives? At any rate, this could be the background of Erickson and his crew, a dangerous group in the extreme. As such, they offer much more jeopardy to the Enterprise than merely a group of criminals rounded up and deported. So, a lot of this whole World War III and genetic supermen stuff was Roddenberry's idea, it seems. As he had done many times before in one memo, and in this instance in just two paragraphs, Roddenberry had completely reinvented a story from something that might have worked on Lost in Space to something that did work on Star Trek. But there was much more than the backstory that Roddenberry felt needed to be changed. The characters of Erickson and MacGyver's annoyed him greatly. Roddenberry continued, the script is an example of how illogical, unmotivated antagonists and protagonists can reduce science fiction to just space pirates. Marla is so sophomoric, I doubt if any of us could stand her even today, except possibly as an extremely shapely actress, of which unfortunately we get too few on this series. Hmm. Roddenberry was also disturbed with how Kirk was portrayed. In Wilbur's script, Kirk avoids making a decision about whether to revive Erickson's frozen shipmates. Roddenberry told Kuhn, worse than any other proceeding, our starship commander must wait on higher command to make a quite ordinary and human decision on whether or not to revive a group of people who are presently in suspended animation. God help us if we've come no further than this in 300 years. In fact, God help us if the captain of the USS Los Angeles would wait for higher command in the Pentagon or State Department to make such a simple decision. There seems to be a compulsion among writers to picture the future as totally computerized, inhumanly authoritarian, and coldly big brotherish. Huh, yeah, imagine that, huh? I know none of us want to go in that direction, but God help Star Trek if our writers push us in that direction. Now, Carrie Wilbur was not asked to do a third draft of the script as badly as a third draft was needed. Instead, that would be done by Gene Kuhn. Following the directions set forth in Roddenberry's memo, Kuhn did a major overhaul of the story, generating the yellow cover first draft from December 7th. Harold Erickson became John Erickson, who is revealed to be really a criminal named Ragnar Thorvald, a major participant in the First World Tyranny of the 1990s. Uh, He slept on the script for 2 nights and then did another draft. This version made it, but then a few days later, he rewrote it again and now had a revised final draft dated December 12th. He felt confident enough to send this one to DeForest Research, to NBC, and all Star Trek department heads, including Roddenberry and Justman. All seemed happy except Justman and Roddenberry. 24 hours later, Roddenberry had rewritten the script himself. In this draft, Erickson then became Khan Noonien Sin. Of the final draft, Bob Justman sent word to Roddenberry. I would like to state that I find it nigh well incredible that you managed to do a complete rewrite of this episode in one single night. And I also find it practically astounding that you have managed to clean up the story and streamline it into its present shootable condition. One element Roddenberry had added, though, disturbed Justman, who wrote, "Although I find Khan's badgering of Marla in Fiend 56 is a clever device to get her to capitulate, I feel that I must object strongly to having him shove her to the floor. I feel that perhaps we should discuss this more. Also, I'm still not quite in a position to accept Marla's final capitulation to Khan." With this revised draft, Roddenberry now listed himself as the first writer, followed by Gene Coon. Carrie Wilbur's name didn't even appear on the title page. However, by the time the episode was aired, Gene Coon was listed as writer, followed by Wilbur, who was given a separate story credit. This time, Roddenberry's name was absent. Apparently, a higher source at Desilu had spoken. On January 6th, the Writers Guild of America turned its thumb down on a request by Roddenberry to share the credit and payment for the script. Robert Justman, if asked, would have argued this point adamantly. If Roddenberry's name was admitted, he was in good company. Kirk and Khan both make reference to John Milton, and he doesn't receive a story credit either. Okay, so director Mark Daniels, after the crowning success of directing The Menagerie, returned for his 6th episode of Star Trek. Despite his weakness at staging action sequences, Daniels remained a favorite of the producers. And then, of course, we have Khan himself. Ricardo Montalban was everyone's first choice to play Khan, and he was already a star. The 45-year-old had top billing in films since 1947, usually playing Latin lover types. In fact, he was the male lead in a movie called Latin Lovers in 1953, opposite Lana Turner. On the stage in 1958's Jamaica, he was nominated for a Tony Award as Best Actor in a Musical. Roddenberry knew Montalban from their association on a 1956 sci-fi project for the Chevron Hall of Stars, titled The Secret Weapon of 117. I've never heard of that. And they say here that this is listed on IMDb, but it's under the wrong name. Instead, it's called The Secret Defense of 117. And Montalban also worked for Roddenberry on an episode of The Lieutenant. Joe DaGosta said, "Ricardo was one of those people we all knew in Hollywood because he was a movie star and just beginning to do TV. We scored with a higher caliber actor than we expected." Now, Madeline Rue, at 31, played Lieutenant Marla McGivers, a well-liked TV guest star. She had been on television since 1957 and would work with Montalban on 3 separate occasions. First, in a 1960 episode of Bonanza, then here on Star Trek, and she would work with Montalban again in 1982 on an episode of Fantasy Island. She also frequented many of the same shows that Montalban did, with appearances on I Spy and the Wild Wild West, and she also appeared on The Lieutenant. Blaisdell Mackey, 34, played Lieutenant Spinelli. Let's see if I can find. He was at the helm station in this episode instead of Sulu. There he is. That's him there next to Nimoy. He would return for Star Trek for the 1967 episode The Changeling, this time playing Lieutenant Singh, no relation to Khan Noonien Singh. And then John Winston, in his second of 11 appearances, would appear again as Transporter Chief Kyle. Let me find. There he is. And James Caserta says the name Singh was an old friend of Gene that he lost track of and wanted to honor. Really? I didn't know that. It doesn't mention that here. And Jay Rocker says no Corinthian leather on the Enterprise. Uh, Montalban gave an amazing performance in this episode, and of course in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Yes, he did indeed. Yeah, and of course that was when of course Star Trek II came out, that was kind of one of the popular jokes we would say to one another. We'd talk about the Enterprise having rich Corinthian leather, of course, referring to the oh, what car company were those commercials for? Because it was from a car commercial, but I forget the model of the car. Does anyone remember what the car was? I can't remember it. Okay, James Doohan and Scotty continued to gain stature. And let me find a better one. Scotty. There he is. NBC was as pleased with Doohan and his character as the producers were, and all were looking for ways to involve Mr. Scott in more episodes and to greater significance. After commanding the bridge for the first time in the previous episode, Mr. Scott is now included among the top officers attending the formal dinner with Khan. Other than Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, Scotty is the only other one to wear a dress uniform. Also included at the table is Mr. Leslie, played by Eddie Paskey, who had to sit in the captain's chair in the past, but as designated by the lack of formal attire, is now outranked by Mr. Scott. And of course, Scotty's also in the hearing. He's got his dress uniform on there too. And where's a better? There you go. There's a better shot. Okay, shooting for this episode began on Thursday, December 15th, 1966. It also happened to be the day that Walt Disney died at the age of 65. Filming began on the bridge. Daniels covered 10 pages of script, 15 scenes in all. They wrapped at 5:55 p.m., allowing the cast and crew time to make it home in time to watch Balance of Terror, which aired on NBC that evening. Mark Daniels said part of the problem in Space Seed was trying to visualize Khan's tremendous power, where he could turn on a finger. He could simply flick a finger and turn somebody upside down. That was difficult, but we got away with it thanks to stunt people and judicious cutting. Day 5, all other corridor scenes were shot, as well as scenes outside the sick bay by the elevator and outside Muller MacGyver's quarters. The latter was meant to give us our introduction to MacGyver's, where she interacts with another crew member and friend named Angela Martine, played by Barbara Baldwin, who was previously seen in Balance of Terror and Shore Leave. And if you may remember, she's the one who was about to get married at the beginning of Balance of Terror, and then later her fiance dies, and Kirk comforts her at the end. And also, if I remember right, Barbara Baldwin was the wife of Joe DaGosta, who is the casting director. All right, hold on. Give me a moment here. I need a drink of water again. Okay. Martine tells MacGyver's of a crewman that is interested in asking her out. MacGyver's is not interested in any man who doesn't have the spine to ask her himself. Later, this insight to MacGyver's character was supposed to help us understand her attraction to a man like Khan. Due to time constraints, however, this very worthwhile scene was left on the cutting room floor. Moods were good when cast and crew, having taken the last shots for Space Seed, left the set that evening on the final day of filming. Jerry Finnerman explained the feeling, saying that was a strong show, especially for the schedule that we had. Daniels had finished on schedule and nearly everyone, and early enough for everyone to make it home for the repeat broadcast that evening of What Little Girls Are Made Of, which took the place of Shore Leave, as the latter episode was still late getting ready for to be aired. For many involved with Star Trek, this was their first chance to see it. When it aired the first time, several weeks earlier, the cast and crew had been running late, stuck out at Vasquez Rocks, ironically filming Shore Leave. Designer Matt Jeffries, who came up with the Enterprise, also designed the model of the Botany Bay. Let me bring that up. Let's see, get a good look at it. I always did like this design. Come on. What is going on? Come on, cooperate with me. Well, this thing doesn't want to. Oh, you're saying it was the. Okay, well, J Rocker's telling me it's the LeBaron. I don't know why it's not coming up. What is. I'm clicking to show that comment. Why is it not coming up? Okay, I don't know what's going. This thing is acting weird all of a sudden. But the Chrysler Imperial LeBaron, that was the. There it goes. I don't know why this thing's being so difficult. Come on. And let me get a better one. There we go. There's a good look at it. That was more difficult than it needed to be. But yeah, I've always liked that design. It's just really simple. It kind of looks like a submarine, you know? And it seems like, I don't know, kind of like a more realistic extrapolation of what a space vessel might be like back at the time. Okay, now in 1968, for the fanzine Inside Star Trek, Jeffrey said that the Botany Bay was actually designed before the Enterprise. It was a little idea that popped up and it wound up being labeled Antique Space Freighter. Star Trek once again spent more than its near impossible episode allowance of $185,000. Space Seed, despite being primarily a bottle show, cost $197,262. Most of the overrun was due to the cost of building and photographing the Botany Bay miniature and the design and construction of the interior of the sleeper ship. The show's deficit for the season was now up to $77,950. Okay, so the first half hour came in second in its time slot behind Bewitched, as usual, man. Bewitched was just eating Star Trek's lunch. And then the second half hour came in third behind this ABC show Love on a Rooftop and the Thursday night movie. All right, from the beginning, it was clear that Space Seed would be a special episode. Sound editor Donald Grindstaff recalled, Space Seed was one of my favorites. We won the Golden Reel Award given by the motion picture sound editors on that particular episode. Audio effects and editing were essential to Star Trek. Sound editing supervisor Jack Finley said, quote, in those days, the major studios wouldn't give you what you wanted if you wanted it for television. I called a friend over at Paramount and got some stuff from War of the Worlds, like the photon torpedo sound effect. I got that stuff and whatever else I could scrounge from around the town. I went to libraries and got every possible thing that might work to put together. I ran those sounds backwards, slowed them down, and did whatever I could to them so that they could work for us. Now, second in charge in the sound department was Joseph Sorokin. He recalled, I obtained all the sound effects from the Air Force library. Some of these sounds are rather hokey and corny now, but you have to view them in the context of the past. At the time that we were putting Star Trek together, the existing sound effects were something like Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers. So we had to come up with something else. Authenticity was very important to Gene Roddenberry. Sound editor Grindstaff explained every room aboard the ship had a sound, and every planet had a sound. It was a monumental thing. Gene Roddenberry once told me to think like a painter. He wanted to paint the sound, which I'll never forget. After leaving Khan and his followers on an uninhabited world, Spock suggests it would be interesting in 100 years to see what crop has sprung from the seed they have planted. A line that was in earlier versions of the script but didn't make it into the filmed episode has Kirk responding that he hopes the crop won't spring right out of the ground and come looking for them. It took 16 years, not 100, for Khan's return in Star Trek II. Entertainment Weekly picked Space Seed as the second best Star Trek ever made, and Seed also made Sci Fi Magazine's Cinefantastique's top 10 list for Star Trek's all time best. Ricardo Montalban said, I thought the character of Khan was wonderful. He was an overly ambitious man that had dimensions. Sometimes when you read a villain, he's a villain through and through, but this man had facets. He was genetically engineered with mental and physical superiority, and it's only natural that he uses that superiority and wants to conquer. On the other hand, he falls in love. He takes this girl as his wife, then he goes into exile. It was a love that was very real. It humanized the character for me. I don't know. I never really got that he loved MacGyvers. It was more just kind of a thing of possessing her, but, that's me. DeForest Kelly said, I enjoyed working with Ricardo, the best of all our guest stars. I was privileged. He is a marvelous actor. Jerry Finnerman said, that was a wonderful show. I mean, the show was so good that they made a feature out of it, a big time feature. And if you realize it, you take a show like that where there's hardly any action, very little action, really, mostly dialogue, but you never get bored with it. Now, if you can hold people with that dialogue for 48 minutes, that's pretty incredible. I mean, we had strong shows, and that just shows you how strong the writing was. And that's the way most of our shows were. And Montalban also said it was a very happy company and everybody was very cordial, very nice. All the regulars were wonderful to me, most helpful, and I loved it. I thought the script was well written, it had an interesting concept, and I was delighted to be offered the role. Okay, and that's all I have on Space Seed. So next week, um, actually, what's probably going to happen is, let me look here. Okay, so next week, I don't know. I may do one next week. I'm not sure. Um, and the next Trek Talk I do will be, I think it's The Side of Paradise, isn't it? Oh no, A Taste of Armageddon. And then, yeah, and then This Side of Paradise is after that. So A Taste of Armageddon is next in production order. Um, but so the next Trek Talk would be on the 10th. I'm not sure. I may or may not do one. It's going to kind of depend because I'm kind of going to be kind of busy. But then the week after that, the 17th, I definitely won't be doing one. So I don't know. The next Trek Talk may not be till the 24th. I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and see. But okay, I want to thank everyone who tuned in for the stream and those who will check it out on the rewatch. Again, if you would please do like the stream, sub to the channel if you haven't already. Check out some of my videos also, if you would, while you're here. And I will see you folks next time and have a good evening.